Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. I am so glad that you are with us today, and it's always awesome for us to be able to hang out, whether you are listening or watching a video version on YouTube. Be sure and subscribe and share it with some of your friends along the way. Today we're going to be doing an old school book report, and from time to time I just want to share some of the books that are impacting me, some of the lessons that I'm learning. Of course, you can't go over the whole book, but one of the things that has impacted my life probably, more than anything else, because you're limited in the people you can meet, but you are not limited in the books that you can read. I mean, I can meet anybody through what they put on paper. Video's awesome, and it's great to see their face and all those kind of things, or audio and hear their voice. But there's nothing like reading a book, underlining, highlighting, and be able to go back and be reminded of some of those lessons. And today, we're actually going to look at this gigantic book, almost 800 pages. And it is The Life of Elon Musk by Walter Isaac. And he's written several different biographies. I think he did Steve Jobs as well as many other folks. But he just most recently came out with Elon Musk. And Elon, of course, has lived an incredible life. And the first thing that jumped out at me is I, of course, knew some of the things that he's done, his recent purchase of Twitter, now X. There's a reason for that maybe we'll get to. Of course, going to Mars and the electric cars. But there's so much that he's done. And what's amazing to me is what we're capable of doing in one lifetime. If we really pursue something with a passion, and that is what he not only did, it is what he is even currently doing. So while I'm enjoying seeing how he has become who he is, it also builds like an expectation of what he might do in the future. And as you read the book, you realize that the future could be incredible discoveries, as he puts microchips into our brains, as he tunnels under the ground, as he gets involved in AI and robotics. But he also has a personality that could lead to destruction. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. So I wanted to share with you, and I was thinking about us getting together today, and whether you're watching. Now, if you're watching, you might notice there's something a little different about me. I shaved off my goatee. Now, it will grow back. I'm not a very hairy person, so it's going to take a while for it to grow back. My wife doesn't like it because she says, and if you're listening, you're not going to know this, but she says I don't have any lips. And so she makes, not only my wife, my kids, and other people that I love dearly make fun of me. So I will be growing back my goatee. Anyways, let's jump in. And I want to start right at the beginning, how he grew up. And he grew up, of course, in South Africa. Stephanie and I actually this year had the opportunity to go to South Africa, and it's the most beautiful place I've ever been. Now it takes forever to get there, lots of hours in an airplane, but it is well worth the journey. I was amazed at the beauty. And I'm not just talking about the animals. We got to see the animals. We had a week of meetings, and then we had a week of being, out with the animals, the lions and the hippos and the rhinoceroses and just all the animals. But it's just a very, very beautiful place. But when he grew up there, it was quite different. You had apartheid, you had lots of crime, lots of death, and lots of violence. And the first lesson that I was reminded of, and I want to share with you guys, is the impact that what we experience as children impacts us more as adults maybe than we realize. And often what we don't want to become is what happens. They often tell us that children who are abused sometimes becomes the abuser. And you would think it would just be the opposite. But we see some of those things in his own life. And so I just want to read a little bit about what it says about when he grew up. It says, as a kid growing up, and this is on page 2 and 3. He says, as a kid growing up in South Africa, Elon Musk knew pain and learned how to survive it. When he was 12, he was taken by bus to a wilderness survival camp. And it says the paramilitary. It's kind of like the paramilitary Lord of Flies, he recalls. That's what Elon called it. He said the kids were each given small rations of food and water, and they were allowed, indeed encouraged, to fight over them. Bullying was considered a virtue, he said. He said the big kids quickly learned to punch the little ones in the face and take their stuff. Elon, who was small and emotionally awkward, got beaten up twice, and he would end up losing 10 pounds. It goes on a little bit later, and it says the second time Elon went to this camp, it says he was older. Instead of 12, he was now 16. He had gotten much bigger, and he was burst all the way up to 6 feet. And it said he had a bear-like frame, and he had learned some judo. It says, so the camp wasn't quite as bad. He said, this is quoting Elon, it says, I realized by then that if someone bullied me, I could punch them hard in the nose, and they wouldn't bully me again. And again, you know, when you read this book, or even if you watch and pay attention to Elon's story, you realize that in business and in life, he's learned figuratively to punch people in the nose. He is not, and I think everyone who's ever worked for him would say, not the easiest person to get along with. And he learned that as a child growing up in South Africa. It says on the next page, it says, as a result, he was regularly picked on by bullies who would come up and punch him in the face. If you've never been punched in the nose, he says, you have no idea how it affects you the rest of your life. So not only did he grow up in a violent community and, end up going to one of these camps, really learning how to be, his father would say, learning how to be tough so that he could actually survive. But Elon goes on to talk about how he was actually abused and impacted by his father. This is what it says about his dad. And of course, the author talked to his sister, his brother, his mother, who was married to his father at this time. Now, they did end up getting divorced. But it says his father was a Jekyll and Hyde nature. 1 minute, he would be friendly, and the next he would launch into an hour or more unrelenting abuse. He would end every tirade by telling Elon he was pathetic. He would have to stand there, and he'd yell at him basically for an hour. He couldn't leave. He says he was not allowed to leave. It was mental torture. Elon says, pausing for a long time, choking up slightly, he sure knew how to make anything terrible. And then he quotes a Barack Obama quote. He says, someone once said that every man is trying to live up to his father's expectations or make up for his father's mistakes. And so when it came to his dad, there's lots of abuse, lots of verbal abuse, even saying that his father physically abused his mother. And she eventually, I think when Elon was about 8, she eventually left him. And then it talks about his grandfather. And what he learned from his grandfather was this whole idea of risk. It says Elon's attraction to risk was a family trait. In that regard, he took after his maternal grandfather, Joshua Hadelman, a daredevil adventurer with strongly held opinions who was raised on a farm. And then it goes on. Listen to this, because when you read this, one of the things you find out, it's like when Elon bought Twitter. He thought about it, but just impulsively acts. He just makes decisions very, very quickly. Listen to what it says about his grandfather. It says, talking about his grandfather, they had 4 children, including 2 girls, May and Kay. May is Elon's mother, born in 1948. One day on a trip, he spotted a for sale sign on a single-engine airplane sitting in a farmer's field. He had no cash, but he convinced the farmer to take his car in exchange. It says that he didn't know how to fly, and he hired someone to fly him home and then teach him how to pilot the plane. So he was known as the Flying Hadelmans. He was described by a chiropractic, because he was a chiropractor, his grandfather was, trade journal, as perhaps the most remarkable figure in the history of flying chiropractors. Of course, there's not a long history of flying chiropractors. But when you look at Elon and the way in which he treats people, you see that what happened to him as a young man had an incredible impact on him. Elon's comfortability, you might say, with risk also played a huge role in it, learning that from his grandfather, and even seeing that in his mother as well. And so the book covers a lot about his childhood. You know, he ends up going to Canada, then coming to school here in America, and I think it's just a great reminder, because wherever you're listening from or watching from today, we seldom think about what kind of impact or what decisions am I making as a result of how I was impacted as a child. And, you know, counselors, of course, can help us with that, but all of us could really, I think, be more maybe successful, more effective if we took some time to reflect upon maybe, why do I think the way that I think? Why do I respond the way that I do? And how did growing up impact that? And how important it might be to go back and forgive our parents, or to show gratitude towards our grandparents or our parents. Even if they passed, I think it's really healthy to forgive. You know, sometimes a life is so difficult and it's so challenging that our parents pass before we realize the importance of forgiveness. And we can think, well, it's too late. And I think it's really important, whether they're with us, if they're with us, you're able to go and to actually talk to them. It's probably going to be one of the most challenging things you ever do, especially if they've mistreated you in some way. But to be able to work back through that and offer them forgiveness, whether they deserve it or not, so that you and I can succeed as adults. Secondly, it's just a great reminder as parents and grandparents of how big our impact is, that it's much longer than just that moment. You think about it for a moment. What is it you remember about your parents? What is it you remember about your grandparents? Right? There are moments. There's not often there's not this long tapestry of when you were 5 or when you were 6 or maybe even when you were 12, and depending on how old you are, maybe when you were 18 or so. But there are those moments that you remember. And when I think back on what I remember about my parents, or even when I listen to my children talk about what they remember, it's moments. And those moments have incredible impact because I am defined by my children based on those moments. And my own mom, my own father, often are defined in my life by those moments. So I just encourage you to take a moment, maybe even hit pause and just reflect. How are you like your parents? How are you unlike your parents? With when I shaved off my goatee, my mouth from the nose down, I look like my mom. When I look in the mirror, she's got white hair, and I think I see my mom. And it's not just physical, right? There are so many ways in which we are like our parents. That's not good. That's not necessarily bad. It's just something that is, and it's important for us to acknowledge that and work through that. And you see that with Elon. Elon, they describe him as someone who, in one moment, is singing, happy, kind of being goofy, and in another moment, the dark clouds roll in, and he just kind of explodes upon people. And it's like a storm. He rains on them. The next day, he doesn't remember it. But of course, the people who get rained on, the people who get wet, do. And the book makes some interesting correlations between what he experienced growing up and who he is today. So I was just reminded of that. Another thing that I learned in the book is just the cost of success. And all throughout the book, I mean, it's just a great reminder. Elon didn't come to this country wealthy. His parents, at times, his dad was an engineer. So at times he did well and at times he didn't do well. But, and I think there's page 39 of the book talks about when he left with $4,000. His mom gave him, I think, a couple of $1,000s that she had cashed in something, and his father gave him $2,000. And so he comes to Canada because he couldn't get into the U.S. but he was able to apply and get a Canadian a passport because of his maternal grandfather, and $4,000. And he comes to Canada, and he has all these different odd jobs, where he's, working. Some of them are very difficult jobs. Some of them are the jobs that we all had as young people. But it's good to remember that the wealthiest man in the world wasn't given his resources. He actually applied himself. And when you read the book, you realize that at a huge cost. It says that when he left June the 11th, 1989. He's 2 weeks from his 18th birthday. And here's what his father said to him when he left. He says, "You'll be back in a few months. You'll never be successful." And often when you pursue your dream, you'll hear those words. Now, normally it's not necessarily from your parents or people who are encouraging you and believe in you, right? It's from those who almost, because they haven't succeeded, they don't want you to succeed. It's important for us in life to listen to those around us and gain wisdom from people around us and not always be going against the multitude of people that God puts into our lives. But there are always going to be those who don't want you to succeed because they haven't succeeded. They've either allowed things in their life to trip them up, or they just haven't put forth the effort. But and I remember when Steph and I moved here 23 years ago, we moved to South Florida, and from a little small town in Arkansas. And I remember there were lots of people who said the same thing. You'll be back. I know growing up, so many people would leave and then they would come back. Because often when we leave, we're expecting big dreams, right? It's like all the people who have went to Hollywood to be, superstars. Only a few are. And many of those who don't make it aren't because they aren't gifted or talented. Many times it's just because they don't persevere. They do go back. So don't be surprised if you hear that. Don't be surprised if people tell you there's no way in the world that you're actually going to succeed. So he comes, and of course, when it comes to this cost of success, he doesn't come with a whole lot of money, and he begins to apply himself. He has these computer skills. He has these coding skills that he can do, and he picks up all these odd jobs. And the first, successful kind of business that he starts himself is Zip2. And here's what it says. Well, let me tell you what it is, first of all. This is back in the day. Does it give a date? This is back in 1995 to 1999. And this is back in the day when we still had the Yellow Pages. Now, I know some of you listening have no idea what Yellow Pages are, but it's the phone book. And it's the business part of the phone book. We used to have, for those of you who are watching, just like this book, we had phone books. And in big cities, we had giant phone books. So what Elon did is he decided that wouldn't it be great to move it online, and not only move it online, but make it interactive so that you could click a business and a map would appear so you could actually discover how to get to that location. And he went to the Toronto Star. You got to get investors, all the things that have to happen. And this is, let me just read it to you. They had a meeting with the Toronto Star, which published the Yellow Pages in that city. And the president picked up a thick edition of the directory and threw it at him. Do you honestly think you're ever going to replace this? And that's funny in 2023 because the phone book has been gone for a very long time. I mean, he was wrong. And of course, Elon was correct. And here's what I wrote in the margin of my book is, can you live in the present, but see the future? Can you live in the present, but see the future? And in ministry, right? I'm a pastor here at Potential Church, and we want to live in today. We want to minister today as effectively as we can in our community and our world, but there's so much change going on, and there's this whole online opportunity and internet and so many different, when it comes to apps and phones and all of that. So how do we effectively minister today, but not get left behind in the future, be able to see the future? The number of companies, it's like Kodak, right? And again, you may not even know who that is, but they were the picture people. They made the cameras, they made the film, they did all that. And they were the first ones given the opportunity for digital photography, and they turned it down. So many companies are capable of succeeding in the present or living in the present and yet seeing or dreaming about the future. And that's one of the things that I was just reminded of, is not only the cost of success, is not just effort, but it's also being able to see the future. What are the needs? How do I meet those needs, whether they're ministry needs or business opportunities or whatever they might be? So anyways, he starts Zip 2, and guess what? It goes really, really well, to the point to where they sell it. Let me read it to you. In January 1999, less than 4 years after Elon and his brother Kimball launched Zip 2, they were called by Compaq Computer Company, which was seeking to juice up its Alta Vista search engine, which I don't know if it's even around anymore, but they offered $307 million in cash. I mean, isn't that incredible? I mean, again, that's incredible when you think about it. Here's a dude that came to Canada, came to North America with $4,000. Now he's being offered $307 million in cash. And guess what? They sold it. The brothers had a split with their ownership, 60-40, and it says Elon was astonished when the check arrived. It was for $22 million. It was his share of it. And he gave his father $300,000. He gave his mother $1 million, and then he bought a McLaren for $1 million. I think is just a way of reminding him of his success. But I'm again just amazed of the sacrifice that's necessary, because we forget that, don't we? I mean, we read Elon's story, the richest man in the world, a relatively young guy, and we think, well, he must have had a head start. And reality is, it was just the opposite. He was mistreated in school. He grew up in a place that was very violent and segregated, and he was mistreated by his father. When he came here, he didn't have any resources. He had and that $4,000, by the way, was in traveler's checks, and he was taking a bus to his cousins on the other side of Canada, and he was late getting back to the bus, and as a result, he ran, and he caught the bus. The problem was the bus driver had put his luggage off the bus. And so he was only left with the books he carried in his bag and a few coins in his pocket. And so it took him months, the book says, to get those traveler's checks back so that he had any resources at all. And here he is now, a multimillionaire. And he had a choice to make, as do we all. There's a level of success we all experience, whatever that dream is. Maybe it's starting a business, maybe it's getting a job, maybe it's getting a degree, maybe it's getting married, maybe it's having a child, right? Whatever it is, we reach, and then what do? And Elon talked about, does he live it up as a multimillionaire, or does he continue to succeed? And the book actually talks about that on page 74. Right, we're not even into the book yet, but and it talks about, was he going to reinvest it? It says, Musk now had the choice, he had described to CNN, living like a multimillionaire or leaving his chips on the table and fund a new enterprise. The balance he struck was to invest $12 million in X.com, leaving about $4 million after taxes to spend on himself. So it's easy to say, well, he still had $4 million, but he began with 22, and he put a vast, 3 times more into that next company that wasn't guaranteed to succeed, X.com. So maybe now we understand why he's changed the name of Twitter to X, because that was in his mind. And in his mind, it was a online bank is really what was on his mind. Well, they end up merging with PayPal. So you got a dude that started Zip2, sold for over $300 million, reinvests that money, and now he's a part of PayPal. And then, of course, we know he goes on. He's got the Boring Company where he does tunnels. He's got implanting chips and electric cars and rockets that he's going to go to Mars. But when you read the book, you are just reminded over and over again of the cost of success and continued success. because I know that the vast majority of us don't want to just succeed once, right? I believe this, that you were created for more than that. As long as your heart's beating and your lungs are taking in air, there's something for you to accomplish, something for you to run after, but it's going to take the same amount of risk, the same amount of sacrifice, the same amount of work. That's why it's so difficult. You've paid it once. The question is, are we willing to pay that price again? Elon is a great example of someone who was. Now, it wasn't all, rainbows and sunshine. He not only had a great challenge in the beginning, he had to deal with failure as well. And the book talks a lot about it. One that I wanted to mention is when he was building the rockets, and he had 3 failures before finally the 4th one succeeded. But in doing so, they all believed that he had in himself as well, just enough money for 3 tries. And the book describes the stress with that third one. Let me read it to you.
When you had that 3rd failure in a row, did you think, I need to pack this in?
Never.
Why not?
I don't ever give up.
It says after 2 failures, failed launches from the remote place, it says the 3rd attempt of the Falcon 1 rocket would make or break SpaceX, or at least that's what everyone, including Musk, thought. He told his team that he had enough money only for 3 tries. I believe that if we couldn't do it in 3, he says, we deserved to die. For the 2nd flight, SpaceX had not put a real satellite on top of the rocket because it did not want to lose the valuable payload if it crashed. But for the 3rd attempt, Musk was all in, gambling on success. The rocket would carry an expensive 180-pound Air Force Elite 2 smaller satellites from NASA, and then get this, the cremated remains of James Doohan, who was the actor who played Scotty on Star Trek. So it's pretty cool how what people do sometimes. The liftoff was beautiful, and the control room in Los Angeles, where Musk was watching, erupted in cheers as the rocket ascended. After 2 minutes and 20 seconds, the upper stage detached from the booster just like it was scheduled. The payload seemed to be headed for orbit. 3rd time's a charm, one engineer shouted. Then once again, there was a gasp. It says that 1 second after the booster started descending back to Earth, as it's supposed to do, but it spurted up briefly and bumped into the 2nd stage. So when when they broke off, or when it divided, it bumped into the other one, and it crashed, right? So it didn't make it to the ground. And here's the part I want you to see, though. Musk had run out of money. Tesla at the time was hemorrhaging cash, and SpaceX had crashed 3 rockets in a row. But he was not ready to give up. Instead, he would go for broke, literally. SpaceX will not skip a beat in execution going forward, he announced just a few hours after the failure. There should be absolutely zero question that SpaceX will prevail in reaching orbit. I will never give up. I mean, never. In the SpaceX conference room the next day, Musk got on a conference call and, began to cast and share the vision once again. And if you know the story, the 4th one made it to orbit. And today, he's not only put satellites into space, he's also taken astronauts to the Space Center. In other words, he has succeeded. And he continues to push towards actually us being a multi-planet people by going to the moon and then to Mars. It's an incredible story, and there's so many more lessons that we could talk about. One that I want to leave you with, and that I was still thinking about, is that Elon has accomplished all that is in his life, and there's so much that we can learn from him. But the life-work balance, how we treat people, is important for us to think, because Elon has left a lot of damage in his path. He's got 10 children. He's been divorced multiple times. He's been through a lot relationally. He's not only fired lots of people, he's left lots of people who have given much to his success hurting. And I don't say that to condemn Mr. Musk. I say that, again, for us to be reminded. And one of the great things about being a believer is, like, how do we manage success? How do we manage life and work? And how do we take people with us as opposed to leaving them in our wake? And they're not easy answers to that question. The scripture gives us some insight. It gives some wisdom. And that's why I encourage you to continue to be a part of the podcast, because along the way, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at life. We're talking to different kinds of interesting people in different walks of life. And we're talking about, how do you succeed? How do you succeed as a parent? How do you succeed as a baker or a banker or a leader? There's a lot to learn. But here's the thing to remember. You can succeed. You were created for significance. The Bible says you are wonderfully and complexly made on purpose by an all-powerful God to do something that really matters. And I hope you'll never forget that. All right. Well, I am so glad that you were here today. And I want to appreciate you for tuning in and remind you, we are on all the apps. We're video live on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe and pass it along. There are lots of people out there that need to be encouraged, and that's our goal. All right. Hey, we'll see you next Thursday right here on the Troy Gramling Podcast. I hope you'll come and join us. God bless, and you have a great day.